The mansion of the Grayson family, located on top of a hill in the suburbs of Los Angeles, was the true embodiment of the American dream. Its glass walls opened a view of the endless horizon, as if demonstrating that there are no boundaries for the owners of this house. The gardens, designed by the best landscape designers, bloomed with a riot of colors and aromas, dazzling with their perfection. However, behind these perfect facades was a void that neither wealth nor luxury could fill. Catherine Grayson seemed like the epitome of success. The wife of billionaire Henry Grayson, she had everything you could dream of: clothes from the best designers, jewelry from the most expensive diamonds, trips to the most exotic corners of the world. Her days passed in pure brilliance. With friends, she spent time in the most expensive stores on Rodeo Drive, leisurely choosing dresses, shoes, and accessories. Their laughter echoed in the cafe, where glasses of champagne were as common as a cup of coffee to others. Catherine discussed the latest gossip, shared plans for the next trip, and smiled when her friends admired her impeccable taste. The evenings were spent at social events, gala dinners, and charity auctions. Catherine was the star of these events. Her elegant image and ability to maintain a conversation captivated the guests. She knew how to arouse admiration, but every day she felt that this life was like a play where she played the main role but did not feel real satisfaction. She lived in a world where every detail of her life was thought out to the smallest detail. But inside there was a depressing emptiness. She lacked something real, something that money could not buy. When she returned home after a busy day filled with compliments and feigned joy, she felt lonely. Henry was always busy. His attention was focused on business, and even in those moments when they dined together in the huge dining room, there was a distance between them that only increased with each passing year. One day, sitting on the marble terrace with a glass of champagne, Catherine realized the depth of this emptiness. She looked at the immaculate garden that stretched out before her, and wondered why, with everything, she felt no joy. Her life was like a clock, perfectly adjusted, but monotonous. Every second brought only the burden of responsibilities that she had created for herself. It was a life that looked perfect from the outside, but every moment of it made her wish for something else, something that would make her truly happy. Adam appeared in their lives unexpectedly, like a breath of fresh air that broke through the thick fog of monotony. Henry hired him after another trip to Europe, where he was impressed by the exquisite French gardens. He decided that their estate also needed updating. Adam, a young but already experienced landscaper and gardener, was the best at what he did. He had an exceptional talent for seeing the beauty in every branch, every leaf, and turning the chaos of nature into a work of art. Catherine first saw him when he was trimming the rose bushes. Adam worked with such thoroughness and concentration that it was fascinating. His tanned hands confidently held the secateurs, and his dark hair, whipped by the morning wind, gave him an effortless charm. He did not wear a uniform like other workers. He wore simple jeans and a shirt that clung tightly to his muscular frame. His image was in stark contrast to the exquisite interiors of the mansion and the dignified manners of the guests who visited the Graysons. "Good morning," Catherine addressed him for the first time as she walked through the garden. Her voice was soft, but confident. She is used to the fact that people instantly respond to her appeal. Adam raised his head and smiled, leaving the tool on the ground. His smile was genuine, unlike many of the people who tried to win her affection. "Good morning, madam," he said, bowing his head in a polite gesture. They exchanged a few words, and Catherine immediately noticed that this man was different from anyone she knew. His manners were simple, but at the same time there was a certain confidence in him, even pride. He spoke to her as an equal, not trying to impress, but also showing no fear of her status. This was new to her, and as much as she tried to convince herself that it was just common courtesy, something about his gaze made her heart skip a beat. Every morning she saw him in the garden working on another project. Adam was always busy, but he didn't look tired. On the contrary, he radiated energy and love for his work. She noticed him talking to other workers, joking, and even helping them when needed. His natural kindness was so rare in her world where everyone was trying to prove their superiority. Once, during a walk, Catherine lingered by his side longer than usual. She watched with interest as he transplanted a small bush. "Are you always so careful with plants?" she asked, trying to suppress her excitement. "Plants, like people, need attention and patience," he answered without looking up, but with a faint hint of a smile. This phrase touched her. She felt that Adam's words had a much deeper meaning. He wasn't just talking about plants, and she knew it. In that moment, an invisible bond formed between them that was subtle but powerful. Catherine began to find excuses to stay longer in the garden. She asked about the plants, was interested in the projects he was planning. Her interest was genuine, but there was something more behind it. She felt how each of their conversations filled the void that seemed inevitable to her for many years. Adam, in turn, was not indifferent to her. He saw in Catherine not only a rich housewife, but also a woman who is desperately trying to find something real in a world of fakes. His respectful attitude kept him from crossing the line, but he too felt that their conversations were becoming more and more personal. These meetings, although innocent, became for Catherine a source of light in her gloomy world. She didn't yet realize what it might lead to, but she couldn't imagine her days without those brief moments when her heart came alive again. The days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, and Catherine became more and more involved in this unusual communication for her. Her mornings now began not with scheduled meetings or charity calls, but with the anticipation of seeing Adam in the garden. Each of their conversations, even the shortest, revived her, as if awakening something long forgotten. She could feel herself changing. Her face, which had seemed emotionless in recent years, now shone with a sincere smile. She began to spend more time in the fresh air, walking in the garden, reading books under the old oak tree, next to which Adam often worked. Her friends noticed these changes, but attributed them to a new diet or spiritual enrichment exercises, which Catherine joked about during their conversations. Henry, focused on business, almost did not pay attention to his wife. For him, her changes were something secondary. He took her happy appearance for granted, like everything else in their lives. But Catherine knew that these changes had completely different roots. Her frequent walks in the garden were more than just relaxation. It was the only time she felt alive. However, there was an invisible line between her and Adam. He was always polite, kept his distance, and never allowed himself too much. His respect for her status and position was obvious, and this only increased her interest in him. Catherine found herself wanting to break that boundary, but her own fears and sense of duty held her back. One day, when the sun was shining brightly on the garden, Catherine approached Adam, who was working at the fountain. She brought him a glass of lemonade, and while it was a simple gesture, it meant more to her than just showing concern. "You've been working all day. You need to take a break," she said, holding out the glass. Adam looked at her with gratitude and slight surprise. "Thank you. That's very kind of you," he replied, taking the drink. They sat down on a bench near the fountain. Although there was a safe distance between them, Catherine could feel the atmosphere filling with tension. They talked about the garden, about plants, but with every minute their dialogue became more personal. "Do you like your job?" she asked suddenly, looking at him. "Yes, very much. But it's not just work. It's what gives me a sense of freedom," he replied, meeting her gaze. The word freedom echoed in her soul. She thought about her life, how everything that seemed to her to be an achievement had now turned into a golden chain. She wanted to ask him if he could see that bondage in her eyes, but she was afraid to hear the answer. Their dialogue was interrupted by a phone call. It was Henry. His voice, calm and confident, reminded her that she actually belonged to another world. Catherine quickly apologized and left, leaving Adam alone. That evening, lying in her bed, she stared at the ceiling for a long time. Her heart was beating faster than usual, and her thoughts were swirling around Adam. She understood that something was changing. She still didn't know if it was good or bad, but she definitely felt that there would be no going back to her old life. The following days were a test for Catherine. She tried not to give her thoughts too much space, so as not to mention Adam. She forced herself to do charity projects, accept invitations to parties, spend more time with her friends, but none of these things brought satisfaction. Her thoughts returned again and again to those brief conversations in the garden, to his look and the quiet confidence that set him apart from others. Catherine realized that even the most innocent communication with Adam became her only source of joy. She was drawn to him like a moth to fire. and she could no longer deny it. But her fears kept her at a distance. What if Henry notices something? What if someone on the staff talks about their conversations? Her position in society was as fragile as thin glass, and she knew that the slightest step in the wrong direction could shatter her entire life. One evening, when the sun was hiding behind the hills, Catherine went out into the garden. She looked for peace, but instead saw Adam. He was sitting on a bench near an old oak tree, looking at the fountain. He also seemed to be searching for something, maybe silence, maybe answers. She hesitated. Her heart was pounding, and she knew that this moment could change everything, but something inside pushed her forward. Catherine moved closer, and Adam looked up at the sight of her. "Do you always work late?" she asked, trying to hide her excitement. "Not always, but sometimes the garden is much quieter at night," he replied, his voice quiet, almost thoughtful. She sat down next to him on the bench. There was a distance between them again, but this time it seemed thinner than usual. They sat in silence, listening to the sounds of water in the fountain. Catherine felt time slow down, and she was overcome with the feeling that this moment was more than just a chance encounter. "Are you happy here?" she suddenly asked, looking at him. Adam thought before answering. "Happiness is a complex concept. I am happy when I work with plants, but happiness is more than work." "And what do you need for happiness?" Her voice was soft, almost a whisper. He looked at her, and there was something in his eyes that Catherine had never seen before. It was the look of a man who is not afraid to be honest. "Honestly, I don't know. But sometimes it seems that happiness is being with someone who understands you." His words penetrated her heart. She felt that this man saw her as she really was, without masks and pretenses. It was dangerous, but at the same time it was real. When Adam spoke again, his voice was even quieter. "And you? Are you happy?" Catherine sighed. She wanted to tell the truth, but she felt that it would be the beginning of something inevitable. "Happiness? I've already forgotten what it looks like," she replied, her voice breaking. "The evening in the garden seems even more beautiful than the day," she said, trying to remain calm. Adam turned to her, his gaze warm and open. "It's really great. But it's not just because of the plants," he said, his words sounding like they had a hidden meaning. They stood side by side, and the silence between them was filled with a tension that was impossible to ignore. Catherine felt their eyes meet, and this time she couldn't look away. It was a moment that lasted an eternity and a moment at the same time. She was overcome by the desire to do something that she had not allowed herself to do for many years. "Adam," she said softly, almost in a whisper. "Yes," he replied, looking directly at her. "Why do you make me feel like I'm alive again?" He moved closer to her, his face so close she could feel his warm breath. Her heart beat even harder, and she knew that now their fate would change forever. Adam touched her face, his touch gentle but sure. She did not retreat, did not object. Her eyes closed, and she allowed herself to feel what she had longed for. They kissed, at first cautiously, almost timidly, but with every second their passion grew stronger. It was real, pure, free of the fakeness that surrounded her life. Adam took her by the hand and led her to the gardener's little house, which was in the corner of the estate. They went inside, and Catherine felt no fear or guilt, only a desire to be with this person. Everything else ceased to exist. Their night was filled with passion and tenderness. For the first time in many years, Catherine felt loved, and not just the wife of a billionaire. Adam discovered in her what she thought was long lost. He was not afraid of her status or position. To him, she was just a woman, and that was enough. When dawn peeked through the window, Catherine lay beside him, watching the first rays of the sun light up his face. She knew it was wrong, but for the first time in her life, she felt like she had made the right choice. When Catherine woke up, the room was already illuminated by the warm rays of the morning sun. Adam was still sleeping next to him, his face calm like a man who knows he has made the right choice. She stared at his features, mesmerized by how he looked at this moment, ordinary, real, completely different from any man she'd known before. But her happiness was overshadowed by the shadow of reality. This night was an escape, a rebellion against her monotonous, loveless life, but she knew that sooner or later they would have to return to the real world, and there, outside this small house, Responsibilities, status, and Henry awaited her. "You woke up earlier." Adam's soft voice interrupted her thoughts. He looked at her with his clear eyes that held no trace of doubt. "I was just thinking," she replied, her voice shaking. "About what?" he asked, but seemed ready for any answer. "About what will happen next," she honestly admitted. Adam sat up, gently touching her hand. "What happened between us was real. I don't regret it, and I don't want you to." His words gave her the confidence she so desperately lacked. She knew it was true, but how could she go on in a world where her every move was being watched? She quickly dressed and quietly left the lodge before any of the staff could notice her. Her heart was pounding as she walked back to the mansion, trying to look calm. Catherine spent the next few days trying to maintain a normal routine, but conflicting feelings tore at her inside. Her friends noticed that she looked different, as if happier, as if more focused. But for Henry, the change in her behavior was a red flag. His keen intuition as a businessman told him that something had gone wrong. One evening, after returning home earlier than usual, Henry found Catherine in the garden. She was standing by the fountain, holding one of the roses in her hands and looking deep in thought. Her face radiated a strange calm that seemed alien to him. He came closer and she flinched at the sight of him. "You look different lately," he said, watching her reaction. "What do you mean?" Her voice was calm, but fear flashed in her eyes. "I don't know. It's just weird how you spend so much time in the garden." His tone was even, but there was a hint of disbelief beneath it. Catherine forced a smile. "The garden is my place of peace. It always has been." Henry nodded, but his gaze remained wary. He wasn't used to things in his world getting out of control, and this moment was the first signal that a rift had appeared between them. Adam, meanwhile, tried to stay away, even though it was incredibly difficult. He understood what they were getting into, but he couldn't deny his feelings for Catherine. His work in the garden became for him both salvation and trial, because every day he saw her, but he could not touch her, speak as he wanted. Furtive glances, short conversations, and the sudden feeling that someone could see created a tension that only increased their attraction to each other. They both understood that they were moving on thin ice, but they could no longer stop. One evening, while Henry was at a business dinner, Catherine found Adam in the garden. Her eyes were burning, and there was determination in her steps. "We can't go on like this," she said, but there was more pain in her voice than confidence. "I know," he replied, moving closer to her, "but I can't bring myself to stay away from you." She looked at him, and there was a silence between them again, full of feelings they couldn't put into words. She understood that this path would lead them to disaster, but at this moment she was no longer interested in anything but him. Their second kiss was unrestrained, passionate, and this time they didn't stop. The garden became their refuge, their little world where there were no responsibilities, fears, or expectations. But reality was waiting for them around the corner, ready to fall on them with all its force. The days after that night were both sweet and stressful for Catherine and Adam. Their connection, now even deeper, seemed somewhat unreal, as if they lived in their own world, which existed only in the shadow of the garden. They hid from everyone, and their every look or touch seemed to be both a comfort and a challenge to fate. Henry, as usual, was busy with work, but his attention to detail and ability to notice the slightest changes in people made him suspicious. He was not a man who could be fooled for long. Too much was at stake: his reputation, influence, and control over everything around him. One day, when Henry was walking through the garden after a long business meeting, he noticed Adam coming out of the gardener's house, and his gaze drifted in the direction of the mansion. There was something unusual in this look, not just respect for the owners, but some elusive connection. Henry didn't say a word, but this detail stuck in his heart. That evening, he invited Catherine to dinner at his home. This was rare for their life, filled with events and distances. She knew that this gesture had a special meaning, but she tried to act naturally. "Catherine, you know I always see more than meets the eye," he began as they sat down at the table in the huge dining room. "What do you mean, Henry?" she asked, trying to stay calm, but inside her heart was pounding. "You've changed. I can see it. And it's not just mood swings. Something's going on." She looked away, sipping her champagne to hide her shaking hands. Maybe I'm just trying to find some peace. You know our lives have been chaotic lately. Henry nodded, but his eyes flashed with disbelief. He had always trusted his instincts, and now it told him that his wife was hiding something important. The next day, Henry, without warning Catherine, invited a private detective to the house. He did not want to make a scandal without evidence, but his reputation did not allow him to ignore suspicions. A detective has been assigned to monitor the staff and Catherine, but everything is as delicate as possible. Meanwhile, Catherine and Adam continued to see each other. Their secret moments were getting more and more risky, but they couldn't stop anymore. In the garden, under the cover of night, they felt free. They knew that their bond could not last forever, but every moment together seemed priceless. The detective quickly noticed what Henry felt intuitively. The pictures, taken from a safe distance, left no doubt that there is more than just friendly communication between Catherine and Adam. One evening, as Henry looked at these photos in his study, he was overcome with rage. He felt not only betrayal, but also humiliation. A man of his status could not afford to be deceived. The next morning, Henry met Catherine on the terrace, where she was sitting with a cup of coffee. His face was calm, but there was a storm in his eyes. He placed an envelope of photographs in front of her. "Is this what you wanted, Catherine?" he asked coldly, his voice sounding like he was talking to a business partner rather than his wife. Confused, she took the envelope, opened it, and froze. Her face turned pale, her hands trembled. She knew it was the end. "Henry, she began, but he cut her off. No excuses, you chose your path." She couldn't find the words. Her thoughts were chaotic, and her heart clenched in pain. She knew that she had lost everything, her status, her life, which, despite its emptiness, was stable. But at the same time, she had no regrets. What she experienced with Adam was real, and it was the most precious thing that happened in her life. Henry did not raise the scandal publicly. He valued his reputation too much to allow this incident to become the property of the press. But he gave Catherine an ultimatum. Either she leaves the house with nothing, or he will destroy not only her, but also Adam. She had no choice. Catherine left. She lost everything, but at the same time she felt that she was finally free. Her meetings with Adam became rare and tense, because now they both found themselves in a difficult situation. But their feelings did not disappear. They decided to start from scratch, far from Los Angeles, from the luxurious estate and from the shadow of Henry. Their future was uncertain, but for the first time in her life, Catherine felt that she was in charge of her own life. Catherine and Adam moved to a small town in the northwestern United States. This place was far from the luxurious world Catherine was used to, but that's exactly why it seemed perfect. Quiet streets covered in the shade of old trees, cozy houses, and people who always greet each other gave her a sense of peace that she had not felt for a long time. They rented a small cottage with a plot that needed maintenance, and it was here that a new chapter in their lives began. Adam knew what he wanted from the start. His love of plants and talent in gardening became the basis for their new business. They decided to open a small nursery where they will grow rare and beautiful plants. The town needed such a place, ideal for local residents who valued nature and tending their gardens. Catherine, who had never worked physically in her life, felt confused at first. She did not know how to dig the ground, transplant plants, or cut branches. But every day she immersed herself more and more in a new business. Her hands, accustomed to holding glasses of champagne and expensive jewelry, now gently touched the saplings, feeling their fragile strength. At first, she just watched Adam, listened to his advice and watched his work. But over time, she began to take on more responsibilities. She especially enjoyed interacting with customers. She had natural charisma and the ability to understand people. Whenever someone came for advice on how to revive the garden, Catherine was happy to share her new experience. Her knowledge grew along with her confidence. She found satisfaction in helping people create beauty with their own hands. One day, when they opened the first display area for their plants, Catherine could not believe her eyes. The plot, which was just a piece of land a few months ago, has turned into a small paradise. Flowers that bloomed in all colors were harmoniously combined with trees and decorative bushes. Local residents came to admire the beauty they had created together. "Did you imagine that one day your life would be like this?" Adam asked as he stood next to her and watched the customers buy their first plants. "No," she replied with a smile, "but I had no idea it would be so wonderful." Their business began to grow. They became not only suppliers of plants, but also real consultants for local gardeners. Adam taught landscape design workshops, and Catherine taught plant care. People admired their passion and how harmoniously they worked together. Catherine felt that her life was filled with meaning. Work, which at first seemed alien to her, now brought her joy. She no longer depended on status or money. It was enough for her to feel that she was creating something with her own hands, that her efforts were bringing results. And most importantly, she was no longer alone. One evening, while they were working in the greenhouse, Catherine stopped to look at Adam. His face was tired but happy. He noticed her look and smiled. "What?" he asked, carefully holding the sapling. "I just think I finally understood what happiness is," she replied. They sat together on a wooden bench near the greenhouse, watching the sun hide behind the horizon. Their hands were dirty from the ground, but they felt happier than ever before. This life was far from the luxury and splendor she was used to, but right here, next to Adam, among flowers and trees, Catherine finally found what she had always lacked: love, harmony, and true joy in simple things. Catherine no longer lived in a world of illusions where money and status decided everything. Now her life was simple, but real. She learned to appreciate every day, every moment spent in nature, next to Adam. Her hands were no longer decorated with diamonds, but they became a symbol of work, love, and care. She no longer felt the emptiness that had haunted her for years in the huge house on the hill. Adam became for her not only a partner in life, but also an inspiration. Together they created not just a nursery, but a small world where people could find beauty and peace. Their work became part of their love, a reflection of their harmony. And although their path was not easy, they never once regretted their choice. Catherine realized that true wealth is not jewels or estates, but the opportunity to live the life you want with the people you love. Her former life was only a facade, but now she has found the essence: herself. The ending to this story was simple but perfect. Catherine and Adam lived on in their cozy corner of the world, growing plants, helping people, and creating beauty around them. Their story proved that happiness is not something that can be bought, but something that is created through love, hard work, and a shared dream. One day, on her way back from the farmer's market, where she and Adam were selling flowers and plants, she accidentally learned the news. Henry had remarried. Her new wife was her former friend Amanda, a woman who had once been her closest confidant, but always, it seemed now, hid ulterior motives behind her smile. When Catherine heard this from locals who were enthusiastically discussing the lavish wedding that took place in Los Angeles, she felt mixed emotions. It was bittersweet to learn that the person she trusted had now taken her place, the place of Henry's wife, the mistress of the mansion on the hill. But at the same time, she felt an unexpected calm. There was no more room for hatred or envy in her heart. The life she once had no longer appealed to her. Amanda had always admired Henry's wealth and status. Her desire to be closer to luxury probably led her to this union. But Catherine knew that on the outside, Henry's brilliant facade hid coldness, indifference, and inability to love. Amanda, as she once did, will also understand this, but later. This truth was undeniable. Her former life was a trap, but now she has found freedom. She thought about how far she had come from that woman who was looking for herself in the midst of emptiness and luxury. She was no longer part of the game where everyone is trying to look happy. Her happiness was here, in the simple things, in the flowers blooming in her hands, in the warm evenings with Adam, in the harmony they created together. Henry and Amanda remained a part of the past that no longer had power over her. Catherine no longer felt betrayed or deceived. She understood that the real victory is the ability to let go and continue living. And now she was sure her life, although not ideal, was real.